certainly the hospitality here, and thanks to AJ for making this happen at the last minute. So, for those of you who don't know, I'm Adam Kokesh, and I just got out of jail. Not too long ago. So, on Independence Day last year, I loaded a shotgun in Freedom Plaza, and I feel really naive about the results, considering I can say, if it's not too much of a stretch, I make a living talking about how dangerous and unpredictable government can be, and was really naive in underestimating the potential costs to me of this particular act of civil disobedience. And it resulted in a SWAT team raid on my home, and myself and my roommates were handcuffed and sat on the floor for about 5 hours while the place was ransacked and turned inside out. And I'm like, well, okay, well, at least after this, we'll have our fair constitutional trial, right? No, it doesn't work that way. And I think for all of the promises the government makes and all the ways it's set up, until you go through it and experience it firsthand, it's really hard to get a sense of how the system works. And I like to think that from a distance, from studying other people's cases, from hearing stories, that I understood. But until you have a front row seat and you really can see the meat grinder up close and personal, it's impossible to really appreciate it. And I suppose it was necessary for me, and in this last year, I've really matured in ways I didn't even think were possible. I learned a lot, and for the tragedy of me spending 4 months in jail and 2 months in solitary, I got to be really humble looking at the stories of other people that I met while I was locked up that make what I experienced, what I went through seem insignificant by comparison. I mean, there's the old cliche of everybody in jail is innocent, right? That's really not true. I mean, most people there are pretty happy to face up to their crimes, their real non-crimes, because most of them are in there for victimless crimes. The guys that really lie about it are the child molesters. They're the ones that'll say, "Oh, I was a thief," and they're not very capable of hiding it when the guards use that against them. And it's pretty messed up, because there was a guy who was was accused, and this is in jail. This is not prison. So this is almost all guys who are there for short term, or awaiting trial, or on sentences less than a year. So for someone who's accused of being a child molester, for a guard to say, "Oh yeah, well, I'm going to tell everybody in this facility what you're really in here for," is asking to get them beat up at best, if not killed. And there was only one guy in there who was like, "No, I'm innocent. I'm totally innocent." And you can see his paperwork, and everybody knew that he was innocent. He was the first black man convicted of rape. First black man convicted by a white accuser and an all-white jury in D.C. in over 15 years. And he had been in there 2.5 years and had a private attorney that screwed him over, and he ended up going back and getting a public defender who wrote a motion to retry the case. And I got to read this whole document, and you're like, holy crap, how did this happen? There were 2 young guys that were in there that were also accused of rape that did 10 months, no prior felonies. They sat there for 10 months awaiting trial before they were found not guilty. And, one of them they're both MMA fighters. One of them was like in the prime of his career coming, how that works when you're, in a career like that, and if you get taken out in your prime, it was just bam, hey, 10 months of your life just gone. And being government means never having to say you're sorry, never having to face up responsibility for that. And I feel like it's kind of an appropriate phase of my activism, having really gotten started as a Marine. I was in the Marines for 6.5 years as a reservist. I volunteered to go to Fallujah in 2004, and it's really funny when I first went before the judge for a bail hearing. I was supposed to get out on bail in D.C. He said, like with all the school shootings, and all these random shootings, we have to be careful about a crazy guy like this who's got an arsenal at home. And you're just like, that's what I'm getting compared to. The only time I've ever been violent was on behalf of the United States government. And then to come back and have violence done to me in the way that it was standing up seemed like a perfectly appropriate bookend to that. But now I'm on, I got a suspended sentence for 20 months, and I'm on probation for 2 years, so I'm getting back to my media production, doing a podcast. I'm moving out to LA, that's what this trip is a part of, or that's what this stop is a part of the trip, moving from Virginia to LA. I'm banned in DC for 2 years, so...
Well, that kind of knocks out something I was going to bring up to you.
No point in me being there for the time being, so I'm really looking forward to getting set up and featuring everybody else's civil disobedience now. So, I hope we've set the bar high enough. I hope if people are ready to step up. I know a lot of people are inspired by this. And I think it might be kind of a cliche, but it really motivates me, not having any kids yet, wanting to have kids, thinking, could I really have kids at this point and say, if I wasn't doing what I was doing, can I really bring a child into this world and say, yeah, here's what I left you with, and I didn't do anything about it. And the cliche is, when we stand up and when we fight back and when we resist, we put ourselves in danger, but when we don't, we're putting our children in danger. And it's almost like you don't want to blame your parents' generation for getting us here, but you can see the progress. You can see how we got to where we are today. You can see all the dynamics from generation to generation. You can look at the national debt and be like, well, there's no way around it. The national debt represents intergenerational child abuse. You spent money irresponsibly, and of course, I don't want to collectivize across generations even, but the debt represents a promise by the government to steal from the next generation. They have extended the ranks of their victims into the unborn with this crazy accounting mechanism that allows them to spend more money than they even have now. Then they're able to actually take from people. And I'm sure most people in this room understand at least the concept of the Federal Reserve. They're able to take money without taking it directly, because if they took it directly, people would be up in arms. And now we're starting to see the effect of this 100 years later. And people are starting to get excited. People are starting to rise up. And I think we're coming to a very important turning point where we've come to the high tide of government. And I know when you get woken up to a lot of these issues, it's really easy to get angry and to get engaged, and you want to be frustrated and upset. And I think what's made, the luxury that I have taken for myself in looking at these issues is really stepping back and seeing it in a much broader historical context. In the process of human development, of 2 steps forward, 1 step backward, and we're in the middle of a major step backward that you could say goes back to the Federal Reserve. You could describe it as the phenomena of modern bureaucracy-based government, modern democracy, however you want to describe it, the phenomenon of modern statism. And I think that's a step backward, and it's a temporary one. And if you look at all of the things that have happened in the meantime, like as bad as things are getting, I mean, if you just look at like the last 50 years of human history, you go, holy crap, we're screwed. Get me a bunker. Get me out of here. Get me my MREs and my water filter and my gold and my guns and my ammo, and I'll be ready, and maybe there will be something else on the other side of that. And if your view is that narrow, then it kind of makes sense. But if you just step back and you think, well, how far have we come from the state of nature to where we are in, maybe civilization is a stretch, but to where we are today, and we actually are living at the most peaceful time in human history. This has now been statistically demonstrated. And that's an amazing thing to be a part of, to celebrate. Like, wow, we've come a long way. And even within the last 100 years of the Federal Reserve and all of the exploitation that it represents through modern government, We had a women's rights movement, and a gay rights movement, and a civil rights movement, and I would never argue for any of the ways that those are instituted in government, but in terms of extending the principles of liberty to more people, the non-aggression principle, the respect for someone's self-ownership, just in our understanding of each other as human beings, there have been so many steps forward in this time as well. And of course, the power of the internet to bring people together makes it that much more difficult. And if you look at those trends against that sort of 50-year narrow window of governments going out of control, although I guess you really want to make that probably more like a 100-year window, right? To include all of the run-up to World War I and World War II and the major destruction of what that represented. But when you really look at the underlying characteristics of what statism is, as the desire, the manifestation of all of our desires to control and dominate and manipulate others by force, the countervailing forces are much stronger, much more long-term. If you look at what makes government possible, and for me this comes from my study of war. I volunteered to go to Iraq. I was in Fallujah for 7 months. My start in politics was as an anti-war activist. And you just look at the connectedness that the internet provides us. And a lot of people look at, if you look at this from a myopic perspective, wow, the war on terror is a major ripoff. Holy crap, we're getting screwed. Our liberties at home are being taken away because now they have a more pervasive threat and it's more dangerous than the force-on-force wars. No, it's not. If anything, the fact that the worst our governments can get away with today in terms of war is the war on terror is a major step forward. They can't convince millions of people to go to the other side of the planet and try to kill millions of other people anymore. You just can't do that. The internet has created too much connectedness among humanity. Do you realize the dehumanization that it takes? I know we have some military vets in the room. We have some guys who have deployed. And this was a really big deal for me in my anti-war activism, talking about the dehumanization of the enemy that's necessary. The conditioning that you have to subject someone to in the military to convince them that person is bad, you should take a politician's word for it that they deserve to die right now. That is so contrary to human nature. You have to have an incredible amount of conditioning and propaganda to get people to believe that. But now, how can you convince someone to go to war? Could you convince the American military today to invade Iran and just kill everybody? When you can get on Skype and just talk to them as easy as someone down the street? They're able to separate this, and this is really important for me, too, in the kind of work that I do, and I hope people can appreciate this as anybody just advocating for liberty or advocating for a better world, is to use honest language. And we're so steeped in propaganda, we're so steeped in the language of statism, we take it for granted. Even me right now, I'm saying we. Whoops. I'm collectivizing us as victims of statism, sure, fair enough, right? But we didn't invade Iraq. No. I can say we in that case because I was, kind of a part of that crime. But when we, as victims of government, start using that language, we feed into it. And already, in the case of the potential of a war with Iran, people in the United States military today are not so naive as to think that everybody in Iran wants to nuke everybody in the United States. They've been able to, the old mechanisms of propaganda, of demonizing an entire mass of people, just aren't there. But guess what? You can apply the same thing to statism at home, too, right? You used to be able to convince cops, hey, those protesters, they hate America. They deserve to be shot. And if you look back to Vietnam, compared to today, the suppression of the protests in Vietnam, or during the Vietnam War, led to Kent State. And Kent State was just the worst incident. There were lots of others where you had military troops. They were using Marines to beat up protesters on the streets of America. Holy crap! Where today, I mean, everybody in the military's got a smartphone, and they go, wait a second, I know why these people are protesting. I don't think so. You just, all of the connectedness, I mean, and I'll even go a step further, because I see a little skepticism in the room. How many of you are thinking, well, what about the NSA, right? Well, what about the technology that's being used against us? Technology is fundamentally empowered. The question is, who controls it? But even when it empowers government first, the creation of that technology is not a bad thing for humanity to have. Now, in the case of, well, let me take a step back in that. About the distribution of technology. Because the longer we go, the more high-tech the world gets, the faster the distribution mechanism as well. And when Gutenberg invented the printing press, it took, decades before Bibles were in circulation enough that the people who demanded them had them. But the comparison that's made now is like that by the end of Clinton's presidency, you could have a smartphone in the hands of the, average person in sub-Saharan Africa who had as much communication technological ability as Clinton did 8 years prior at the beginning of his presidency. Did you guys see that? It's moving that much faster. The distribution of the technology and the empowerment is happening that much faster. So to get the surveillance and the NSA, I mean, is everybody here following this and following the revelations coming out? Everybody knows the significance of Snowden's revelations and all of the information that's coming out about the NSA. I mean, huge, right? Well, we were talking about this earlier. The government's not really trying to fight it. The government's not trying to deny it. Because they kind of want you to know. And this goes back to, if you want to compare to East Germany, it was actually a very small portion of the population that was being directly spied on. And when you had to go and tap phone lines, and when you had to actually have one person to be able to really spy on someone, as opposed to now where you can have one person spying on millions through, gathered data through computer networks or smartphones, they wanted everybody to think they were being spied on. They wanted the population of East Germany, they wanted everybody to think, yeah, we're watching you. Because you know what? People behave better, right? People fall in line. And I think that's part of what's going on now. And at the same time, we have this much greater efficiency of the technology that's allowing them to spy on people through their smartphones, through their internet posts, and they want everybody, they don't care if everybody knows. In a way, I think this is a very encouraging sign. Because when the government is so desperate to control the population that it's in their best interest to have everybody think they're being spied on, you know the end is near. You know they're losing their grip on power. And as scary as this is, it's also very encouraging. And you know that it's different today when they are gathering data on essentially everybody. But are they able to act on it? Are they able to process it? Do they actually have someone reading it, or is it just going into a giant database? Who really knows? But if you think about it, the technology is one that provides for greater accountability. I mean, how many of you are bothered by the prevalence of cameras in general? That there are red light cameras, the government's got cameras in every building, right? Here too. But what's the problem with this? Too much money? Okay, so it's an excuse for the government to rip you off.
Yeah.
Privacy? What else? Surveillance, it feels like you feel like you're being spied on all the time.
Well, you get a fine in the mail, and you don't know what happened, when happened. It's like you don't know when you were attacked.
Okay, so the government can come after anybody at any time and come up with any excuse to rip you off. Well, guess what? That's been true since the tax code was this long, right?
That's what I think. I got nailed by one of the red light cameras over there on 16th at McDonald's on Silvers. My friend pointed them out to me. She's like, here's one, there's one. She showed me every one, and I keep forgetting that one. Here I'm going, 3, 4, 4, 7, the light was green. Who knows when it's going to turn? Boom! There went the camera, and I open up my mail and I'm like, $75? I don't even remember. And technically they cannot get you if they can't see your face. My mom or she could have borrowed my car for the day.
Your ideal?
And you have
Nobody sees your face in there. It's just your
Okay,
face.
I went in and fought it, and their reasoning for everything is like a parking ticket. If you park on the street, it doesn't necessarily mean that you were the one that parked the car there. But since it's your vehicle, you are responsible for it. So if you lent your vehicle to someone, you are responsible for that vehicle. I went in and fought it, and they said, hey, we'll let you off this time. So whenever anything like that comes up, I would go in and fight it. Go in and talk to someone.
And you're right, but you're wrong too on that. See, a traffic ticket is where your car's sitting on the side of the road. Anybody could have parked there. Anybody could be driving your car. They're
Yeah.
trying to charge her money for a moving violation.
Yeah,
which is
that's
completely
exactly. I was for
under
speeding.
the law.
Okay.
So the government, it allows the government to come up with new and wonderful creative excuses to rip you off. But does the government need that? Absolutely not. If the government says, you know what, we want to find a way to squeeze another couple $100 out of you today, they've got a dozen other tricks up their sleeve by which they could do that. Oh, we're gonna we could audit you, right? We could send out building inspectors, we could cite you for all sorts of things. And it's just one more thing. None of these problems that y'all have pointed out here are actually inherent to the technology. If anything, the fact that cameras are getting cheaper gives us better mechanisms of accountability. Now, the government may have gotten that technology first, but now that we all have cameras in our pockets, guess what? Anytime a cop wants to pull something, how much of a check on the police state has that already been? Now, I'm not saying that's the be-all, end-all solution to the problem, but the technology itself is one of accountability. I'm actually really excited to be living in a world where there are cameras everywhere. I just want to know who's controlling them and make sure that it's not the government that's using them for wrong. Now, this isn't much of a stretch, and this is something that I talk about a lot, or used to on my show, is where the technology is going and how it affects these social dynamics, how it makes it harder for government to get away with what it gets away with. So everybody's seen the development of computers from, room-sized machines to something that fits under a desk to something that fits in your pocket. Well, it's not much of a stretch to think that it's going to be in your contact lens next, right? I mean, no major objections to this projection. You can see it now, and it's amazing now with the acceleration of all these technologies on exponential growth curves that you can see, if you want it, guess what? When we have computers that are smarter than us, which by some arguments we already do. I can't do what my phone does. I can't give you directions the way Google does, But we see where this is going. And if you had a camera in your contact lens that was recording your entire life and uploading the data to a cloud somewhere, you think, well, that makes you vulnerable to being spied on. Someone could just see what's going on at any point in your life. Well, if you didn't have government involved, that would be an amazing tool for accountability because you would also have a perfect means of accountability for anybody that wanted to hack into that data and violate your privacy. I mean, yeah, you might get some intimate moments recorded if you just leave it in all the time. But I think that you would want that because if something did happen, you have the ultimate protection. You know that nobody can hurt you without it at least being recorded.
Cameras in Russia. Yeah.
I mean, that's an amazing tool. And when you have it handled by the market and you have the mechanisms of accountability for this, no one will be able to even hack into that without them being revealed as people hacking into that. That's maybe a little projection that's not as obvious in terms of the coding that's coming and the way that people are able to trace things through IP, but if you study hacking at all, you see that there's no pure way of connecting to a system or connecting to data without some traceability. And if anything, it's the government that stands in the way of those mechanisms of accountability being developed.